Fellas, we are back and we're on the precipice of one of the biggest fight cards of the year. UFC Apex 100, Neil Magny versus Carlos Prates. I'm kidding. No, it's an Apex card. It's a classic Apex card, but it is the 100th version of it. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. We'll do that on the back end. We're also going to talk about the best fights and kind of the start of my fandom, because the Apex really was the genesis of a lot of my UFC fandom, the time of COVID, you know. I have a special place in my heart for the Apex, but first thing I want to dig into is kind of, we got some big news out of Jon Jones this week. And I just want to start with this clip. I'm sure you've seen it. He went on the Kevin Iole show, whatever it is. He did an interview with Kevin Iole, and he had this to say about his future in the sport and what's next for him.
Tom Aspinall's the guy that people want to see you fight, right? So here's the question. You're fighting Stipe Miocic, and I know you're focused on that fight. If you defeat him, as you're a 6-1 favorite to win the fight, if you defeat him, will you defend your belt against Aspinall, who has the interim title?
More than likely not. More than likely not. I feel like Tom Aspinall is, I don't want to say nobody, but...
Let's stop there. Tom Aspinall is nobody.
He hasn't proven anything. He hasn't done anything. And I understand that.
Let's stop there. What the fuck you talking about, bud? I hate, we're going to finish the clip, but I hate this thought that Tom Aspinall has not done anything. Tom Aspinall is not earned the next title shot. I hate him saying that. I'll get to that, but let's just start there. That's red flag number one for me.
I mean, he won his belt against Sergey. Sergey just got slaughtered by someone else. So it's just like, I'm not here to...
It's a little revisionist history.
To gamble someone else making a name off of me. I'm here to compete against the guys where when we look back, 10 years from now, it'd be like Jon Jones fought this guy and that guy and this legend and this champion and this champion. If there were to be...
Pause. I understand what he's saying here. Like having Stipe Miocic on your record, if you're just looking at it as a blank slate, you go back and say, oh, he fought Stipe. But let's make no mistake, this is not Stipe of the glory years. This is a Stipe that hasn't fought since 2020, 2021, whatever the case may be. This isn't, this isn't the world beater Stipe. So for him to say that, it's like if you have a win over Tom Aspinall, everybody that's watching currently is going to go, holy fuck, that is a giant win. If you beat Stipe, like Kevin Iole said, 6-1 favorite, nobody's shocked. Hello world, you beat an old guy. Continue.
Be a fight of a guy that's still on our UFC roster that would be not only financially worth it, but legacy worth it. It would be Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira and I, we both 37.
Light heavyweight champ.
Yeah, we're both.
And let me make this clear. I don't hate that fight. The Alex Pereira fight's a fun fight. It's a great fight. Alex Pereira is on a historic run. The name value is 1,000% there. Continue.
We're both 37 years old. Right now, I weigh about 235. I'm an incredibly light heavyweight. I think Pereira walks around at 240.
This is where I find it interesting. The fact that he brought his weight up right there, he's 235. The fact that he brought his weight up right there kind of tells me, like, he knows Tom Aspinall's a clean 260, 265. His last fight, he weighed in, I think, at the heavyweight limit or close to it. It's weird to bring up your weight in this situation. Like, you're a heavyweight, bud. You're the heavyweight champ. You fight from 205 to 265. Everybody in that range is fair game. Continue.
And I think that fight would go much farther on my legacy than a young man who's cool today and maybe gone tomorrow. I remember a time when the whole world thought Johnny Walker was going to be the guy to beat me. And
that's pretty much it. I get the sentiment. I get the sentiment of what Jon Jones is saying. Like, Alex Pereira on his resume, it's a fantastic win. It's a fantastic win, but I'm going to say the quiet thing out loud right now. It makes him more money. When we're looking at the career of Jon Jones, you assume he's got this Stipe fight. Suppose he's going to retire. The way he's talking now, it doesn't seem like that's the plan. It looks like his next fight, he's trying to cash out. And I completely get that. I understand the sentiment. And I love the Alex Pereira fight. I'm not mad at it one bit. If that fight gets called, I am officially jacked the fuck up. The only thing I have a problem with is him saying Tom Aspinall has not deserved it. Tom Aspinall hasn't deserved it. He hasn't done what it takes to fight you. You're the heavyweight champ. This isn't, I mean, Jon Jones is in a position where he can make the call, but as champ, it's next up, next in line. That's the answer to who you're fighting next. It's whoever's next in line, and you have a guy holding an interim belt. You fought Cyril Gane. Did Cyril Gane earn it? Does he have a better resume than Tom Aspinall? What made that fight okay? Was it because he had a big win over Tai Tuivasa? And no disrespect to Tai, I don't have a problem. You know, I love Tai Tuivasa, but if we're playing this game, Tom Aspinall starching Sergey in the first round on short notice because you got hurt, and I'm not holding that against you. I'm just saying this was like a 10-day call where he's fighting this big old scary Russian. I understand that he lost to Volkov after the fact, but at the time, Sergey was on a tear. Scary motherfucker. We all agree. I mean, play a little revisionist history there if you want, but Sergey was a bad motherfucker walking into that fight. 10-day notice, Aspinall starches him. Then he goes out and starches Curtis Blades in a couple minutes as well. Like, this guy has done everything. Who else is there aside from Cyril Gane in the division that he needs to beat? If you're playing this, he hasn't earned it. What did Cyril do? What did Cyril do to make it okay, other than the fact that he weighs in at 245 and he can't wrestle? And let me make it clear, I don't think Jon Jones is scared of Tom Aspinall. I don't. I think that him mentioning the weight, a little telling. He knows Tom's a full-figured motherfucker. But also, part of me feels like he's not scared of Tom Aspinall, he's scared to lose the O. And I know it's not a real O because he's technically got one loss, but it's an O. We know it's an O, and he's the GOAT. But all legends must die, and having a win over Tom Aspinall is much bigger than Stipe. And I'd argue that it's bigger than Alex Pereira. If we're talking about your legacy as a two-division heavyweight champion, having a win over Tom Aspinall is much bigger in the long run than having a win over Poatan, who fought at 185 at one point, is now at 205. He also tweeted something, and I want to read it real quick, just because I think he heard the backlash that he got from this statement, and I don't think his tweet made it any better, but it really kind of nails home the point that I'm trying to make. That the quiet thing out loud is that he's looking for a money fight, and Alex Pereira does that to him. If we're just looking at it from a financial, I'm getting pay-per-view points, the UFC is going to pay me, Alex Pereira is a much bigger fight than Tom Aspinall time being. I mean, Alex Pereira's had a historic run. A historic run. He's probably the hottest name outside of Ilia Topuria in the UFC currently. Jon said, "As at this point in my career, every decision is rooted in purpose. My journey isn't dictated by hype or outside opinions. It's about crafting a legacy that speaks for itself. One step at a time, I'm here to do what's right for my career and my legacy with a vision that's clear and unshakable, focused, driven, and in complete control of myself. The story continues and it's unfolding exactly as I envision." You're here to get paid, bitch. You're a prize fighter. And again, all due respect, Jon Jones is the GOAT. We all agree. It's not even up for discussion. He's the GOAT. But Tom Aspinall is the rightful, has more than earned it, interim champion in your division. To flat out say, nah, I'm not going to fight him, he hasn't earned it, that's fucking ludicrous. That is literally ludicrous. But it's Jon Jones. He can do whatever the fuck he wants. I get it. I get it. But let's say the quiet thing out loud. You want to get paid. Your next fight is probably your last. You want to get a big old fat paycheck. And Alex Pereira is a way less dynamic. He's a problem. But he's a way less dynamic problem than Tom Aspinall. You don't have to worry about Alex shooting on you. You get to be the wrestler. You get to do to Alex what you did to Cyril. A flashy stand-up fighter that you're going to take to the ground and fucking choke out. You can't do that with Tom. He knows it. It's a harder fight. A harder fight, bigger risk, lower reward. He wants to get paid. And I can respect him for it. But don't say he didn't earn it. That kind of pissed me off. It kind of pissed me off. Anywho, let's hop into a little Apex theory, huh? Apex 100. I know the Apex, it gets a bad rap. The fight feel in the Apex is not quite what it is in a giant arena, and for obvious reasons. The crowd's tiny. I think I looked it up, it holds maybe 1,000 at capacity, which actually seems like more than I thought. Regardless, it doesn't have that same big fight feel. When you're in the Apex, you don't get that, you know, you don't get those grandiose walkouts, the cheering crowd. When a knockout happens, there's no explosion. It just is what it is. It's a purist's favorite place because everything is on display. The sound of the punches, the heavy breathing, the corner, you can hear it all, which is kind of why I like it. I like it. And I understand that I don't want big fights in the Apex, but at the time, when the Apex really kind of took off, when we got into the world of Apex, it was COVID. There was no other options. The UFC was only available in empty arenas. I think they did one in Jacksonville, Gaethje, Tony Ferguson, in a completely empty arena. And then they started putting fights in the Apex. And this was really, you know, call me a casual, but this is the start of my true fandom. Before COVID UFC, when it was the only sport to watch, I loved the UFC. I liked the UFC. It was a fun thing, but I was tuning in for big fights. I was a Conor McGregor fan, you know? It wasn't like I was sitting down every Saturday to break down Neil Magny, Carlos Prates, you know? It wasn't like that, you know? I'd watch UFC 3 times a year, but when COVID happened and the Apex emerged, I became an addict. Truthfully, the start of my fandom started in the Apex. Guys like Corey Sandhagen, knocking out Edson Barboza and Frankie Edgar. I fucking loved Corey Sandhagen. I still love him. But I'm just saying, like, those knockouts in the Apex, again, with no crowd, nothing in the way of the experience, speak to you in a different way. Paddy Pimblett's debut was in the Apex. The rise of Sean O'Malley, the secondary rise of Sean O'Malley. He had fights with the Eddie Wineland knockout was in the Apex. The loss to Chito Vera was in the Apex. And then coming back and beating Thomas Almeida the way he did. All in the Apex. Francis versus Stipe. If there's one fight I could watch live, it would be Francis in the Apex small cage. How fucking crazy is that? Another one I remember very specifically, Derek Lewis, Curtis Blades. I was in my apartment. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, my buddy Scott right over my shoulder, and we are watching Derek Lewis. In one of the most disgusting knockouts you'll see, Curtis shoots him for a takedown, Blades uppercut, fucking starches him, falls right back. It was a holy shit moment in the Apex. You could hear it. You heard it. So I have a lot of good memories from the Apex. I know it gets a bad rap. It doesn't have that big fight feel. Fights can feel a little bit more stale, and the UFC doesn't necessarily, as we're seeing with this card, feel the pressure to put on a big show in the Apex, but it still holds a warm place in my heart because it is truthfully the start of my fandom began when I really got attached to the characters of the UFC, to the fighters of the UFCs, to the Corey Sandhagens, Charles Oliveira, Tony Ferguson. When I really fell in love with Charles Oliveira, it was in the Apex. It holds a special place in my heart. And the fun thing that I heard is they're expanding it. This is the last Apex fight before the renovations. So they're making it bigger. It says $25 million in renovations. I think they're gonna try to build it out more like a you know, smaller, I hope like 5,000 seat venue, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 seat venue. Kind of like, remember we saw Merab Dvalishvili, Petr Yan, where were they at? At the theater at Virgin Hotels in Las Vegas, 4,500 seats. It's a little bit more intimate and it can be really fun, but you still get those big crowd reactions. But as a fan experience, seeing a fight live, I don't think that there's anything better than like the Apex or that smaller theater. Like, as a guy that's been to a handful of UFC fights, I've really only been to 2 cards. I went to McGregor-Poirier 3 in Las Vegas, T-Mobile, and then I went to Sandhagen, Chito Vera in San Antonio. The one thing that I'll say is, as close as you can afford is what you should get. The experience of it, being in the crowd, along with the cheers, the oohs and ahs, it's fantastic. But for the most part, if you're not on the lower level, you're watching the screen because you're not close enough to really see the fight. But when you have like an Apex, I fucking badly, if the tickets weren't so ridiculous, they're like $1,200 a pop. It's called a VIP experience if you got like a Carlos Prates Neil Magny ticket. But it's gotta be fucking awesome. It's gotta be incredible because you're that close to the fight in a smaller, more intimate experience where you can hear everything. If anybody's gone to an Apex card, let me know. I wanna hear what you thought of it. But I love the Apex. I understand the purpose of it, and I hope with the renovations, it becomes kind of like that smaller theater experience where you're not necessarily gonna get the biggest fights there. I don't want Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic to be at an Apex venue, but you can get like non-title fights like a Merab Dvalishvili, Petr Yan at the time. Obviously Merab's a champion now, but at the time, like that would have been an awesome experience. The closer you can get to the cage, the better. And then my other question I had is, do you think that the Apex has allowed for better pay-per-views? Like I was just looking back at like a 298, 299, 300, that run that the UFC was on at the beginning of the year. Because they're not on the road, like when you go on the road, Neil Magny and Carlos Prates, unless you're in Brazil, you're not selling that out in Denver, you know? I mean, you probably would just because you're the UFC and they're just so hot. But 298, the fight before that in the Apex, Hermanson, Joe Pyfer, actually a pretty good banger in the Apex. Also before that, they had Roman Dolidze versus Imavov. So 2 Apex back-to-back, and then you get the 298 card, which you're asking fans to pay money for. We get an absolute stacked up card because they didn't have to sell those tickets before. Volk Topuria, obviously the top of the ticket's gonna be the champion, we know that. But under that, Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa, Jeff Neal, Ian Machado, Gary. I feel like that fight, Jeff Neal, Ian Machado, Gary, that is a premier fight night that could easily headline a fight night in Chicago or, you know, wherever. Also, Merab Dvalishvili, Henry Cejudo at the time. Merab was not the champ. That's a fight night headliner all fucking day, but we're getting it on a paid card because I think of those Apex cards. Then you go to a fight like 299, O'Malley versus Vera 2, we're in Miami. You're getting Dustin Poirier, Benoit Saint Denis on that card. Kevin Holland, Michael Venom Page. That is a prime UFC fight night headliner. Gilbert Burns, Jack Della Maddalena, a prime UFC fight night headliner. Petr Yan, Song Yadong, again. Like, I'm not necessarily sure we're gonna get these undercard fights. It's gonna be so stacked on pay-per-views if we don't have these in-between UFC fight night, you know, kind of lower level grade cards because you're forced to have to sell them. Like, even if we look at 309, Stipe and Jon Jones, it kind of falls off, doesn't it? Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler, Bo Nickel, Paul Craig, all at the top of the card. But then after that, we get into Viviane Araújo, Karine Silva, and then Mauricio Ruffy and James Lallentop. Top 3 are great fights. After that, you're getting a little dicey. I'm not saying they're bad fights, but it's Mauricio's second fight in the UFC, and then you have a 9 versus 11 women's fight because you had to sell a fight night 2 weeks before. You lost Moreno Albazi, you lost Rose Namajunas, and Aaron Blanchfield. Those would be perfect fights to stack at the bottom of this and make that $79.99 or whatever the fuck they're making us pay now pay-per-view better. I just think there's some correlation between that. How stacked we're getting on these big pay-per-views and their ability to use the Apex to kind of fill in fights. Just have like a Magny Preview fight that I'm not gonna say nobody's interested in, but it's definitely less interesting than others because you don't have to sell it. You can't do that in an arena. All that being said, Carlos Prates, Neil Magny, here we are. Carlos Prates. The Fighting Nerds. Let's talk about them. How fucking good are the Fighting Nerds, what? This gym is really, it feels like over the last year, maybe year and a half, 2 years, has really kind of exploded, in my mind at least. The things that they've been able to do, I know a lot of these guys ran through the Contender Series, maybe even all of them. I know for sure Carlos did, Kyle Bahayo did, Gene Silva did. I'm not sure about Bruno Bazil. Mauricio Ruffy did come through the Contender Series. I think they all did. Now I'm thinking about it. I think they all came through the Contender Series over the last handful of years. But these guys have been on a fucking tear. How fun are the fighting nerds right now? As I just mentioned them, but Caio Borralho at the top of the welterweight division now just starched Paul Craig and then goes out and goes into war with Jared Cannonier in a fantastic fight. Almost knocked him out. 5th round, put him on his ass, but Jared Cannonier, a tough motherfucker. And then we had like Gene Silva, KO Charles Jourdain, came back 2 weeks later and then beats the brakes off of Drew Dober until the doctor stops it. Like, this team is on fire. Bruna Bazil. I'll be honest, I didn't know her. I didn't know her. She was fighting Molly McCann. I'm a fucking Meatball Molly. How can you not love Meatball Molly? I'm a rider for Meatball Molly. I'm like, okay, she's a 3-1 favorite against this Brazilian chick I haven't heard about. Let's go get a dub. And then in the intros, they said she fought out of Fighting Nerds, and I was like, oh, this might be tough. This might be tougher than expected, and it was. The body kicks, the jiu-jitsu. These guys are so well-rounded everywhere. Maybe not Carlos. We haven't seen him on the ground, but he's a bit more of a kickboxing specialist. But Bruna Bazil beats the brakes out of Molly McCann. And then I just mentioned Mauricio Ruffy. He's had one fight in the UFC, but it was against Jamie Malarkey. It's just playing with his food, it looks like. He's doing weird sliding takedowns and fucking messing around in there and then knocks him out in the first. It's just, this team is so much fun. They're so much fun. It reminds me of the rise of a lot of other great fighting camps, like City Kickboxing. Obviously, we had the ATTs and the AKAs and, you know, these massive camps that are holding just UFC champion and stars after stars. But this is like a real from the ground up, from the dirt, shoot-to-boxing type Brazilian team that we haven't seen in a long time. And it's so fucking exciting. All these guys are finishers. Finishers. And that doesn't change with Carlos Prates. In his last 9 fights, he hasn't seen a 3rd round. KO, 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 KO. Dude's a nasty little boy. And he's so fun. You see him after the fight smoking cigs, just dancing around, doesn't give a fuck. I mean, he's a fun fucking cat. How can you not like a guy like that? Carlos Prates comes from, I think he started his career, he spent a little time, I'm not sure if it was at Tiger Muay Thai or not, but in Thailand. And I feel like that's where he learned it from. Those boys, those Thai fighters, they love Chief and Six, brother, more than anybody I know. But he just brings that sort of energy. It's the energy of the gym that's just like fun. They put on the little glasses with the tape on it. They're the fighting nerds. And there's some bad motherfuckers. And I think Neil Magny's up for it. And Magny's no slouch, brother. I love me some Neil Magny, but we gotta understand, 29 and 12, that means he's had, let's do some quick math, 41 fights. He's 37 years old, you know? He's seen brighter days. And in last fight out, he got knocked out by Michael Morales pretty quick, pretty violently, 1st round. He did beat Mike Malott, which is kind of a rising Canadian star, stopped him in his tracks. He was getting his ass kicked for most of that round, but it doesn't really matter how you start, it's how you finish. He beat Mike Malott. He kind of got brutalized by Ian Gary. He had a real boring win against Phil Rowe. Just kind of a lot of clinching up on the fence. Lost to Gilbert Burns. Choked out in the first. He's definitely against the 8 ball here. I think Carlos is like a 750 favorite or something like that. But when you're talking about just veterans of the game, Neil Magny is one of those boys. Tough out no matter what's happening. Tough out. So the card falls off pretty quick after that. We lost Cody Garbrandt, some other fighters, but it's an Apex card. Apex 100. We're going to have a fun little time. And like I said, it holds a sweet spot in my heart. I love being able to hear the corners. Another one that was great, and I think it was actually the same card as Charles Oliveira and Tony Ferguson, was Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo, the first fight. God. Definition of you could hear the corners just screaming. Like it was a different vibe in there. Oh, I don't know. That's my fight preview. Carlos Prates finishes the fight, in my opinion, within 2.